all right? Can everyone hear? Victoria, can you let me know?
Yeah,
in addition,
go ahead.
Yeah, you can. Okay, good. In addition, I'm also the parent of 2 college students, one with disabilities, Jack, whom you're about to meet. Our educational journey was the inspiration for the founding of our organization. We are based in Louisville, Kentucky, but have a national aim. And a lot of the issues that we've faced, I think, are not uncommon, unfortunately. And my professional background, which is in organizational behavior and instructional design, so a lot of adult pedagogy in there, also has contributed to being able to do this work, not just with Jack, but for other families as well, and educators, by the way, who are often reaching out asking, how can I serve these students? But despite, our experiences as a family with privilege, access, and education, it has been challenging. Jack Be Nimble seeks to reimagine the special ed system so that it really works for all educators, families, students, to produce the kinds of outcomes that our students with disabilities deserve and that they're capable of, and that really truly reflects their substantial capacity to learn. We started this because we recognize that not everyone has the privileges that Jack has. Along with his disabilities, Jack's fortunate to have some academic strengths, as well as a family who've been able to provide considerable support to him. He is considered a twice exceptional student, which is a student who also has and is considered gifted. And he actually finished high school as a full-time residential dual credit student on a university campus. So we realize this is not the nature of most of the programs that you all are working with. And although he's an outlier, we still feel his story can be of value. And so can that of educators like Dr. Jessica Koehler, who unfortunately is not able to be here in person today, but here she is in her own words to share with you a little bit about herself. So here we go.
Did you start the recording?
Oh, I'm
Because
so
we're not
sorry.
hearing.
I am so sorry. I was playing through. It wasn't playing through properly. Oops. And now it's not switching. All right. I'm going to, for the moment, just share with you that Jessica is a member of our board. She is also a PhD, has a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and herself is an educator. Her doctoral research has been primarily in applied motivational psychology theory, and she's been working on applying that to positive youth development programming. Right now, she's actually in your neighborhood, for those of you who are in North Carolina, at Wake Forest. And she continues to consult with us as well as other organizations seeking, again, to kind of unlock the potential of not only students with learning differences, but all students. And so on that note, and I'll try to fix the audio before her next slide, here is Jack to tell you a little bit about himself.
Hello. I can't speak for all students with disabilities, but being able to take dual credit classes in high school made a huge difference for me, and I'm very grateful for it. I don't think I would have been able to go to college on my own without doing it. Without taking the dual credit classes, I would not have known what accommodations I would need for notes and for writing and for lots of other things for college classes, or the other support I would need. It's not so much that the content is a lot harder, it's the volume of work and how fast you have to turn it around that is challenging for me. Among other things, I have a writing disability. Some of my dual credit teachers and professors would let me take tests orally. Once they saw that I did know the stuff, they could compare my true knowledge to what I could do in writing, and they understood that there's more than one way to communicate. So we both learned. But it was often kind of a battle, and sometimes it still is a battle. Why? It doesn't need to be. Now, I want to ask you to think about something as I show you some slides. Which of these students do you think has a disability? Trick question. All of the students pictured have some form of disability, as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Oh, you've overshot
Sorry.
the one more back.
There we go. Sorry.
All of these students pictured have some form of disability as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act. These 3 students have disabilities you might be able to observe. However, these 2 students do not, and therein lies one of the greatest challenges. We may think we know who they are, but we don't. And we may think we know what they are capable of, but that's not necessarily true. We've gotten pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good about what we need to do to accommodate certain disabilities, mostly those we can see. We know how to build a ramp and widen a door, but for students with hidden disabilities, like me, who actually comprise the largest group of prospective college students with disabilities, we're not there yet. And the accommodations we need are as necessary for our access as is the ramp for a person who uses a wheelchair.
Oh, you're on mute, Judith. Judith.
Okay,
There you
sorry
go.
about that. A few little glitches here this morning. Thank you, Jack, for doing that. And just a few housekeeping notes. I've tried to get this audio thing straightened out here, but please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. We're going to try to save some time for Q&A at the end, but we do want to run through some context before we get there. And Victoria, who's helping us out, thank you so much. We'll monitor the chat box. The other thing is that we encourage you to tweet your thoughts to us. And there is a conference handle. We're not sure what it is, but if anyone knows it, please put it in the chat box. We are recording the session, so you'll be able to go back and review if you'd like. And you can see from the overview, we're just going to try to go through as fast as possible here to give you some context, really, as Jack said, for who these students are. So Victoria, I'm going to just go ahead and skip to 17 if you don't mind. You can see from slide 17 that we have a lot of students, actually, more than I think people realize, who are in high school, at least in 2018-19. The most current data that we have from OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, which monitors by the Department of Ed. Approximately 14% of all high school students have disabilities that are recognized and dealt with as a part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, or IDEA, as some folks call it. This number does not include, however, another 250,000+ students with Section 504 plans. And I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but they are also students with disabilities, but not receiving special education instruction. The important thing here is, next slide, please, is that 3/4 of these students are actually being served in general education classrooms, and the overwhelming majority of them are students who have disabilities like Jack, in terms of, in addition to autism, he has a learning disability and ADHD, which is often frequently occurs with autistic individuals, falls in the IDA under the other health impairments. But you can see the overwhelming majority of these students are in fact in general ed, and there really is no reason that they should not and cannot be participating in dual credit opportunities if they have and are given the opportunity for the foundation to get there. In North Carolina, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to download the data, but we suspect it's pretty close. Most states kind of reflect that, somewhere between 12–15% of students, maybe another 2 to 3% with 504 plans. And just as a note, I think there may be a few folks from North Carolina. Your state report card only presently reflects through 2016. And notably, and this is kind of one of my themes here, it does not provide a summary of who students with disabilities are in terms of how many are served under each of those two regulations. So on slide 20, here we can see that, again, we have about a third. This was actually from 2009 to 2013. So at that point, we had about a third of all US high school students taking some form of dual enrollment, dual credit, and I know NASEP's term is concurrent enrollment. The data, though, that the OCR has collected for the first time, actually in 27-18, shows on the next slide that students served under the IDA actually, despite making up that 13 to maybe 15% of the entire student population, we have fewer than 3% of these folks. And I do want to mention that there's another session tomorrow being presented by Knowledge Works, which has a is going to do a deep dive on some of this data, and our data kind of doesn't fully line up with theirs. I'm looking directly at the OCR data, which they are as well, but I'm also looking at Section 504 students, and we're looking at it through a slightly different lens, whether it's 1% or they're 3.9%, and I believe it's closer to 1%. The truth is that it's too big of a gap, irrespective of what the actual number is. And I just want to check in with Victoria. Are you guys still able to hear me? I know you can see me because I'm seeing myself. Maybe some thumbs up. Anybody out there? Okay, great. So when we continue here, we can see in North Carolina on slide 22. Yeah, the next one. Thank you. That the number is probably what I believe is a little bit closer to the average. So in North Carolina, it looks like, this is from the OCR data, that you had about 1,300 students with disabilities out of over 76,000 students with IEPs who participated in some form of dual credit, dual enrollment coursework in the 17-18 school year. Next slide, please.
Oh. Like
and
me,
Jack, this is you. Yeah,
yes,
that's you.
I know. Like me, most students with disabilities are actually able to be successful in college.
Next slide.
But unfortunately, too many either don't start a program or if they do, they don't finish it.
Okay. So next slide. They don't finish it, so 38%. Then what happens? Well, unfortunately, this perpetuates ongoing challenges. Without a college degree, as we know, the difference it makes, we continue to have this persistent disability pay gap, along with some sufficient challenges or significant challenges to living independently. There's some new data that actually is just coming out now that shows on a positive note that individuals with disabilities are being employed at greater rates. And we really think that's awesome because they should be, and we need them, right? We have, everybody's talking about the need for workers. One of the things though, that tends to slow folks down as they age out of the K-12 system, get into post-secondary, is their lack of rigorous academic experience. And so, next slide, please. I want to take just a quick minute to talk about, let's see here. Yeah, are we still there, Victoria?
I am.
Yeah. To talk about the statutory framework for post-secondary and secondary, which really, kind of illustrates on the next slide, which is this college and high school pie chart. There are a number of federal laws to be familiar with, and of course, each state has their own regulations. I do want to be clear, I'm not an attorney. This is not intended to provide you with legal advice. And you should, of course, consult with your own staff. But I am very familiar with these regulations, and there's a lot of confusion about them and how they impact high school students who want to participate in DE programming. So to begin with, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which covers both public and private universities. And you can see that they're all enclosed in this larger yellow oval circle here. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act also is implemented and has to be implemented by both secondary and post-secondary institutions, but there are two different sections, subsections that pertain, so they're slightly different. Importantly, though, at their core, these are really civil rights laws designed to protect people from being discriminated against on the basis of their disability. The definitions of what constitutes a disability is overlapping, but there are some differences. Section 504 explicitly, though, covers students of all ages who have a physical or mental disability that substantially limits a major life activity. And that can actually include reading, learning, and concentrating. The IDEA, on the other hand, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, requires that states identify all school-age children who may require special ed services, and that those who do qualify are provided with a free, appropriate public education, FAPE. So that concept, FAPE, doesn't exist, as I'm sure you're aware, in post-secondary. But it does exist even for Section 504 student prior to graduating high school, and it exists in a different form, not as FAPE, when you get to post-secondary. So for example, a student who might need to have their blood sugar checked because they're diabetic might actually have a modification, or not a modification, an accommodation in their classroom to go and have it regularly checked. Again, just as a side note here, one of the challenges that Jack has faced and that we continue to face is that the actual language used in Section 504 for post-secondary is academic adjustment. And it's assumed that that doesn't mean modifications. However, that's not actually what the law says. And I encourage you to read it, and we'll give you a link to it in some resources. Because what it actually says is that an academic adjustment can be made based on a case-by-case review. And the goal is to achieve the same access. So there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding, but again, if you want to learn a little bit more, you can check out the session that that KnowledgeWorks presenting, excuse me, tomorrow at 11. And in fact, one of the presenters, Carla Phillips-Krivickas, and I kind of fused this material together. If you're attending the NASEP conference in October, you'll hear some more from us there. So this is our rallying cry. Compliance should be the expectation, not the destination, because on slide 30, you'll see, thanks, thank you, Victoria. I know I'm trying to go through as quickly as I can to leave some time. On slide 30, you'll see, if you're familiar with the, if you can change to slide 30, I'd appreciate it. You know, that's okay. I mean, I'm speeding through. Too many of our students with disabilities wind up on what I'm calling the school bus to couch slide. So it is somewhat analogous to the school to prison pipeline, in that we see over, you know, maybe 1 year out, they're doing okay. When we start looking at 3, 5 years out and further out, we see that they are disengaged at much higher rates than their peers without disabilities. And we know that participating in dual credit could make a huge difference for them to gain that firsthand experience, as Jack shared. Slide 31. I want to talk for a few minutes a little bit more about the barriers. We're going to just skip to slide 33, but I will say that there's a short clip of Jack presenting to our largest school district in Kentucky, where we're from, on this topic. It's about 4 minutes long. Normally I show it, but I think I'm just gonna make it available to anyone who's interested. It's pretty provocative, but it really nails down some of the limitations that are really self-imposed and not necessary. And as I said earlier, even though some of Jack's story and experiences may not align with that of many of your students, the essential elements still do. And irrespective of the type of program or where the class is held, very few dual credit programs have considered how students with disabilities might participate. These students are just simply not on our radar. But the good news, as you can see in the next slide, slide number 34, is that when they do, this is a small group, it's from Kentucky, but Kentucky reported that 61% of those students on the top bar, the kind of gold colored bar, who took a DE course successfully completed it, compared to 80 something. But again, of course, we'd like this number to be higher for all students, and we'd like all students to have more access. But we believe that with intentional design and support services, we can really achieve some of these aims. Slide 35, please. You all, I'm sure, know that we're no longer targeting students like Jack, just the most academically advanced students. That's awesome. We're increasingly focusing our attention on underrepresented groups. It's really time to include students with disabilities for whom early exposure to these post-secondary pathways is critical to cultivate, both a mindset and a skill set to optimize, as I've repeatedly said, their chances for future independent living. And we really have to start seeing them literally and figuratively as students first and foremost. But to do that, we need to let go of a few assumptions. I'm going to try again here to play the recordings from Jessica, but Jack, I think you're going to say something about slide 37 first, right?
Is it this one?
Yes.
Slide 37.
Yeah, that's 37.
Okay.
As a reminder, the majority of students with disabilities are like me, and they spend most of their time in general ed classrooms pursuing regular high school diplomas, just like their peers without disabilities. Next slide, please. And the majority of college and high school classes take place, but in high school classrooms, not on college campuses. So we have high school students taking their classes at their high school. Next slide, and I think that's the recording.
Yeah, sorry, I have lost access to it. So, so what do we assume about students with disabilities? Here, and again, I apologize. Dr. Koehler's comments are very much worth hearing, and I'm struggling to get this all together. So, we'll make them available to you in the upload to the conference website. But where we're headed is we need to really fully consider, are these students able? Are they qualified? Are they interested or motivated? And to really look at them as individuals. So when you take a look at the brains of people with, for example, ADHD, slide 40, please. You can see that science has provided us with some insight. So we're now learning that even though there is this invisibility, if you will, to some of these learning differences, we're actually learning rapidly that they're real. We can see them. We can see them in PET scans such as these of individuals with ADHD. And you know, one of the challenges has been for us as a family, to speak on a personal note, is that every time someone is abusive of the system, and frankly that does happen, so we understand why some people are assuming that some of these kiddos maybe are just trying to play the system. Every time something happens like that, those of us who are dealing with legitimate challenges are hurt. And I just as a reminder, they're really few and far between, but I think part of the message here is, slide 40, please, that the implications for these accommodations, that they may give an unfair advantage or water down rigor, or that they're not appropriate perhaps for a college and high school course, or they're not required, are some of the things we're asking you to think more fully about and to re-examine. Is that the case? As an example, if we're providing to someone who is hearing impaired, you know, a translator for someone who's deaf, as an example, we don't tell them it's all in their head, just work harder. We don't question their trustworthiness. We don't worry if we're giving them an unfair advantage by allowing them to have access to that accommodation. So some of these underlying assumptions really influence policies regarding accommodations for students, especially with invisible learning disabilities. And we're seeking to really challenge the status quo on this. Slide 42, please. Students with learning disabilities are, in fact, students first and foremost. So the question is the accommodation limiting or increasing the student's capacity? And again, keeping in mind, we are still talking for the majority of these programs about high school students. So is prompting to complete or turn in an assignment, or taking an oral exam, as Jack mentioned, or helping them break down a large project or paper into subcomponents, we think that all of these should be acceptable, and we think that they are legally acceptable, but again, that's for you to decide. They build capacity, and what really becomes tricky is that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, but that's really true for all grade teaching and really applies for all learners. Next slide, please.
Mhm.
So what's acceptable in a college and high school course really needs to depend on the individual student's needs and their specific education plan, as well as the state's regulatory framework. Next slide. Again, policies like some of the access policies may inadvertently screen out, however, students with disabilities. Slide 45. Here's a good example where entrance criteria, for example, requiring that a high school student demonstrate that they're prepared to benefit from the course, which I see often on Memorandum of Understanding, that's fairly subjective. So a student with dyslexia might not be able to demonstrate in the typical way you would expect, but perhaps could demonstrate preparation through a different measure or assessment. And frankly, if you require that all students be well organized, as I've seen in on one program application, you've probably eliminated most teenagers, many students with ADHD, and frankly, lots and lots of adults. Jack, you took you had an unusual experience yesterday, didn't you, with one of your professors, first time ever, of doing an oral essay. Can you tell us about that for a moment?
Yes. Well, I do have the accommodation to take oral exams, and I have been doing that for several years. I had never actually thought of being able to take an essay orally, as I just assumed that, well, it was an essay, so I'll have to write it, even though I do have a writing disability. So when I was going over my accommodations with this professor, he actually brought it up, well, why don't we just do the essay orally, which caught me by surprise, and I'm honestly quite thankful for, as it allowed me to, since it takes me so long to write, it did not take me as long to prepare an essay that I could give orally, and so I could spend more time on other projects and assignments I have to do.
Right, now in that class, your grade, you're not being instructed in writing, correct?
Yes.
Right, so that's one of the things to look at. And under, again, this is allowable as an academic adjustment under Section 504, and I urge you to look at it. So in this case, we have a truly wonderful example of a professor being flexible, understanding something about universal design design for building programs, for testing, really seeking to just ensure that Jack had mastery over the content and not as concerned over the method. Clearly, if the course was writing instruction, that would not have been appropriate. We understand that. But it is, again, it's got to be something that we look at on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. So one of the other requirements that we typically see is the requirement to self-advocate. This is partly what Jack talks about in the brief film clip. What, Jack, are some of the challenges you've faced with respect to self-advocacy, to this idea?
Most frustrating one is I have autism. Autism is a social communications disorder. Asking me to self-advocate is kind of often without further instruction is kind of like asking someone in a wheelchair to physically build the ramp for them to go up. If they were capable of doing that, they wouldn't need that accommodation in the first place.
Yeah, and that's a big one, isn't it? So that applies to many students who are expecting a certain level of initiative where even adults and even adults without autism may find that difficult if we haven't actually instructed. So if we could skip to slide 48, Victoria, to get to some of our recommendations so we can wrap this up and give you guys a chance to just ask questions or make comments. You know, the real question is, and the real request here is, our ask is to include these students in program design without assuming that they may not be interested. Are we encouraging them to apply? Are we exposing them to courses which could lead to concurrent enrollment opportunities? And In Jack's case, we actually at his original high school started the very first college fair in which we invited representatives from disability offices to come so that students with disabilities could start that process of learning about what would be needed. Oftentimes we find that students with disabilities are not even included in college fairs. They're just really channeled into working straight out of school or technical programs, which are great. Vocational and technical programs are really important pathways, but there are also quite a few students who would like to attend college and who could benefit. So that's like a minimum, I guess, goal is to just let them know about the opportunities. Next slide. We need to really explicitly design. We need for guidance counselors to understand really what is required by both regulations, but again, to encourage and reach out to these students, make sure that they're getting those rigorous classes. Examining selection criteria we've talked about, really looking at reporting is something that I feel will help us greatly in better understanding. We need the granular reporting that many of our states are not yet doing. We hope to be a force in changing that. We need to know as much as we can about these students. An interesting little note for us is that we visited quite a few colleges, right, Jack? As part of our search. And when we went, again, because we had the means to do so, this isn't true for every student, but instead of asking the disability office, which by the way was pretty much always our first stop, we went to the disability services office before we even went to the general information session. And why was that, Jack?
Because whether they could provide me with my accommodations I needed, honestly, was one of the biggest factors in whether I went, because it doesn't matter how good the classes are if they can't provide me with my, or aren't willing to provide me with my accommodations, I probably wouldn't succeed.
Right. And so instead of asking, what can they do for me? I taught you to ask what question?
How do they support their professors? As I have often found, that is the biggest clue into how committed they are to supporting students with disabilities.
Right. And we see that repeatedly. So you've had some wonderful experiences and some not so wonderful experiences. We are deeply appreciative to the professors who understand that they have flexibility. Next slide, please. Slide 50, just about done here. Thank you, Victoria. Please assume that these students are capable, that they are motivated. And again, to look at them as if they were what they are, in fact, students. 51, actually, again, I'm going to refer you, Carla will talk a lot about policy levers. I just want to call your attention on slide 52, that there are many ways that we can address students with disabilities in policy. Starting place certainly needs to be in those memorandums of agreement that address students with disabilities, but keep in mind that for a high school student taking a high school or college and high school course, particularly on the campus of their high school, in their high school classroom, the IEP is, as far as I can tell, the governing legal document. And especially in the case of concurrent enrollment, we don't believe there's any good reason not to implement the IEP. One of the ways that you can provide flexibility that we had suggested for Jack in one class that he did take on this original high school campus, was to really look at a rubric for receiving the college credit based on the level of modification that might be required. So in other words, if there was excessive modification from the point of view of the instructor, well, maybe he was introduced to college and high school, and that alone, by the way, is really, really very helpful. but maybe he wouldn't have received college credit and just received high school credit. In his case, you did over 70 college credit hours before graduating. You took 5 years, right, to go through high school, but you did not receive an associate's degree or anything like that. You got a high school diploma from that school on that college campus, right?
Yes.
So we believe that you were a high school student. Slide 53. Sorry, we are running out of time here. Minnesota is a great example, actually, of a statute which requires the post-secondary institution to provide support services and negotiate with the high school institutions. For me personally, this is a hallmark best practices statute. We'd love to see more of them. Slide 54, North Carolina, I checked real quickly, has a note on the Career and College Promise overview regarding classroom accommodations, and it refers students to the institution's academic support services on the college campus, even though they are taking the course in their high school. This is a problem from my point of view. Slide 55, the regulations are a floor, not a ceiling, and you can get creative. As far as I know, no university has lost their accreditation serving a student with disabilities. Slide 56. So the question is, are you including students with disabilities in programs and services and funding streams? We develop explicit programs for other underrepresented populations, like students who first in their family to go to college. Why can't we do the same for students with disabilities? And on that note, I really do want to open it up for questions, comments. I apologize for the length and the glitches.
So I had opened up chat. If anyone has questions, that might be the easiest way to do that. I'm looking at.
Sure. If you are there
some-
specific questions or anyone want to jump in, please feel free to turn on audio for everyone.
Okay.
And Jack's camera is not working, so I'm sorry you can't see him. By the way, he usually does a little pitch. He's available for talks like these if you want, as long as what? What's your criteria, Jack?
I have that it's not interfering with my coursework.
Yeah, that's a good one. I agree with that. So I'm looking at the chat, but I'm not seeing.
Okay.
Thank you
So
for your patience.
Yeah. So this is Victoria. So I did actually allow everybody, if you'd like, you could unmute. I do have a question here from Dr. Pettiford. How do we begin that process? I'm a dean of students at an early college who is very concerned with this piece.
Great, thank you for the question. I think the first step is really looking at your criteria for who qualifies, and looking at your MOU and seeing if and what you can build in. Again, Minnesota's a place to look. They have it in statute, but there are others. I would highly recommend you attend tomorrow's session with KnowledgeWorks. Also, this is part of the consulting work that our organization is doing. So I'd be really happy to talk with you further about this too offline. And by the way, you can reach me. I will put, I don't know if we didn't have it here. I'm going to put my email in the chat. The starting point also, if you're already in a program, maybe to really look at and talk to students like Jack, who I mean, how much time do you spend in classes as a high school student, Jack? How many hours a week are you in the building?
In high school or?
Yeah, a lot.
Yes.
They're the experts. They can tell you what works and what doesn't work. I really encourage you to talk to them. Somebody else is saying hard time with vast differences in accommodations. Disabilities are there, but yeah, I don't know, Suzanne, I'm not sure what you're asking, or are you just commenting?
just a comment
Okay.
she says.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we agree that there is a difference, but not as much as we think there has to be. And again, if you are really committed to looking at, if you're doing a DEI initiative at your university, at your school, we need to start including students with disabilities in our DEI conversations. I didn't get into the financial data, but not only are we underserving this population, they're a good additional income stream, especially for schools that are struggling. Yes, you may spend a little more to support them, but the benefits are really, really fantastic. So a lot of students with disabilities will wind up staying close to home after graduation because they may need the additional support from home. And that's good for our states. It's good for our state economies. They are going to community colleges probably at a higher rate. Well, I know for sure they are. And they tend to, stay within, again, the network of what they know. So there's a lot of also financial incentive to serve the student group. They're also incredibly loyal as a group. I think that if you've served someone well, they're very loyal to you. So we appreciate that. Any questions for Jack? Can you speak to high schools, counselors, special ed staff working with college disability offices? So this is from Tim about the collaborative opportunities. Where should they start? Oh, that was someone else. I'm sorry. There are examples of good collaboration. Again, I think that even though it would be ideal for them to be built into policy, you can start today. I mean, the first thing would be in your presentations to guidance counselors to remind them that students with disabilities are also eligible, and to really find out from them, what they are doing to let their high school students know about the opportunities and be sure and encourage them to include. When you go talk to a high school, why not bring someone from your disability services office with you to address questions that those students may have. And again, I think you really need to examine the underlying assumptions with respect to where we're allowed to implement what set of accommodations. I think we have to get back to the mission here. What is the mission behind these dual concurrent enrollment programs? It's really to equip our students who want to go to post-secondary education to be able to do so. And as Jack said, there's just no issue. For him, there was a lot of benefit also for the residential piece.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Suzanne.
How are you?
I'm good. How are
Okay.
you?
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I was in a meeting, but it's the end of it, so I just pulled my earphones out.
Suzanne, could you please?
Thank you for calling me.
Okay, Judith.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know we're running out of time here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there, but we can continue the conversation through our website, online, in email. I just want to thank you so much for coming and being interested. From the bottom of my heart as a parent, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I know this is a great discussion and I have to end it because we all have to move on to another session. Jack, thank you so much. And Judith, thank you very much for participating.
And thank you, Victoria. We'll see you all later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.